Welcome to the February 12th CIP work session, Capital Improvement Program. And I don't have any notes on here who is leading this, but I am guessing it's Barbara. Yes, because your name is on the presentation. Are you Manager Deborah? Manager Deborah Campbell? You can guess the other day I was Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. Good afternoon, good evening. We are here to provide you with just an update on the capital improvement program, the budgeting process. We have for probably since last fall been talking to you a lot about the operating budget. We've had presentations from both our general fund and enterprise fund departments talking about their needs and so forth. Today, this is more or less a level setting presentation around the community, capital investment plan. We're going to provide you with kind of a walk down memory lane. If you want to get to possibly the first slide. We have a number of slides. I think the presentation may be about 30 or 40 slides, but I wanted to begin with the end in mind in terms of if you don't hear anything, you hear these three messages. Like most communities throughout the country, Asheville has historically been challenged to fund capital needs. As the community grows, needs and demand grow, and so it's hard to keep pace. And it's not just a phenomenon in Asheville, it's a phenomenon across the country. Recent investments have improved the overall quality of our capital assets, but as you will see, and Barbara will talk about, there's an increasing gap between what we need and the resources that we have to address those needs. And then lastly, obviously continued investments are required to maintain our momentum. You will see in this presentation that, again, we have had decades where we have had very, very little investments in our capital infrastructure. And if you add to the amount of growth that's occurring in our community, then that need for capital investment has just consistently outpaced our ability from a revenue perspective to address them. So I'm going to turn it over to Barbara, and I would hope that this would be fairly informal. So if you have questions, please stop us or her at any time and ask your questions. So thank you.
Thank you, Manager Campbell. Mayor and members of council, again, I'm Barbara Whitehorn, Chief Financial Officer for the city. Here's a little overview of what we're going to be looking at today. We're going to look at, capital planning and budgeting overview, kind of review what that is, history of our capital investments, the current status of projects, future needs and costs, and then we'll talk next steps. So capital planning and budget overview. We have council's strategic priorities that you all have identified, and achieving these elements of your strategic vision requires investment in capital. And as you know, that's a challenge. Ms. Campbell just spoke to that. And next, I'm going to provide a little background and information about capital investments and what those really are and what they mean. So what is a capital asset? I know this is probably an obvious thing to all of you because you've heard this over and over, but for the people in the community that may not be as familiar, capital assets are things that have a longer useful life, like land. Land is a big one. Building and improvements, infrastructure, equipment and machinery. And the capital budget is separate from the operating budget, generally because of the scale of the investment, the longer time horizon. Projects, unlike an operating budget that goes year to year, the time horizon on a single project can go multiple years. We use debt often to fund capital investments, and it's project-based as opposed to being program-based, which is how we run our operating budget. So now a little history of our capital investments. And I'm trying to slow down. I know I get to talking too fast, so slowing it down a little. So looking back 10 years, and we thought this was a really great way to sort of look at our capital investment and how this has changed. In fiscal year 9-10, we spent $8.6 million in capital investments across the city. 8.4 of that was pay-as-you-go, which is basically cash that we had, and then we financed $200,000 worth of something. In fiscal year 18-19, this year, we anticipate spending $33.6 million, most of that financed, and then intergovernmental are other sources of funds that we try to offset some of our costs through grants and agreements and those kinds of things. And if you recall, just to kind of review, we shifted from that pay-go model to a financing model because when you debt fund your projects, you can better leverage the existing funds. And you basically get more bang for your buck, if you will. Instead of having $200,000 to spend this year, you spend $200,000 over a number of years and you can do a project that's $2 million. So it makes a significant difference to use a financing model rather than a cash model. A little more on our historic spending. You can see it was fairly level. In 2013, you see a dip, and that's the year that council adopted the additional 3 cents for capital, and we were ramping up to the new capital program. So that was kind of a planning year, so you shouldn't look at that as like a negative thing. And you can see that we've really been ramping up on that. But one really key thing to consider when we're talking about historical capital spending, and I think it's important to point out to the 2016 bond referendum, and kudos to council for that, because that is a huge deal when you consider that our last GO bond referendum was 1986, was our last successful bond referendum. So Whitney Houston was just becoming popular, and it was 30 years between our last successful referendum and 2016. So y'all actually making that happen was a pretty big deal. But the impact of that on our community is that meeting services and being able to keep the infrastructure in a good place is really challenging when we don't have those capital dollars to spend. And then our last successful GO bond referendum, successful was 1986, and we had an unsuccessful one in 1999. So back when we were living La Vida Loca. So we really have not kept up with a consistent capital program, and many cities will do GO bond referendums on a regular 2 to 4 year basis to sort of keep the investments going so that your community keeps its infrastructure at the level that you want. Okay, so moving on, and do feel free to interrupt me. So current status of existing projects. So our GO bonds, the initial phase is completed for some road improvements, MLK Junior Drive, traffic calming, bus shelters, and traffic signal replacement. We have a number of other projects that are under construction, including outdoor courts, playgrounds, bus shelters, the Montfort Complex, and others. These are in design, and I'm not going to read these to you, but you can see there are quite a few projects that are in design. And then there are projects in planning, also in the GO. And the difference between the GO bonds is the referendum, just for people's edification, the referendum bonds versus our limited obligation and special obligation bonds, which are secured by different funds. I think it is really important when we're talking about what kind of projects we're doing, we're wanting to look at everything through an equity lens and making sure that we're making investments equitably throughout the community. So what we've done is here's a map of Asheville that shows the percent of people living below the poverty line, and the darkest areas are the highest levels of poverty, and then the lightest areas have the lowest levels of poverty. And what we wanted to do, and we did, was overlay projects with those areas. And I think you can see from this that we really are trying to make investments in a very equitable way across the community. And this actually is a map that you can access online and look at what the projects are and, look at all of that stuff. And here is the link in case anyone wants to take a photo of it. Leave it up there for a second. It's on the Asheville website, and you can look at all of the geographic investments that we're making in the community, whether through the regular capital improvement program or the GEO bonds. Okay, so moving forward, our projected capital spending in the next few years. We're in 19, which is that first green bar, because those are estimates. 2021, we anticipate being our largest spending year, and that's because some of our major projects are finishing up that year, like the Tiger 6 projects, the RAD tip is part of that. So they'll be completing, and then some of our spending falls off. But one important thing to note when you look at this is that that doesn't necessarily mean that we have additional capacity for projects. Because each of these projects that are happening, when they finish in 2021, we issue the permanent debt at that point, and that debt isn't paid off until 2041. So all of those things have a 20-year sort of life cycle for their payment, as well as obviously for the life cycle of the assets, which are generally longer than 20 years.
So Barbara, on this, is this a baseline based on the projects we already have that are going on? So this is, later on we'll be seeing new projects. That does not include any of those, is that correct?
It does not. There are no new projects here. This is all existing in the plan right now.
Okay. So it would be fair to call this like baseline, right? This is kind of like the baseline. Okay.
Yes. So where do we stand as far as what this capital spending is getting us? And one thing that we thought really sort of spoke to the challenge that the city and you all as our governing board face is road resurfacing and the impact on our pavement condition index. We have an annual allocation for resurfacing of about $3 million. And our current PCI, the pavement condition index, is 60.8. Below 60 is failing. So, we're passing the class, barely, but we're passing the class. And then we're adding in the GEO bond funded resurfacing of 16 million, and that brings our PCI to 61. So when you think about that, $16 million is really only going to get us that tiny little bit better. That's sort of, well, I think that's probably our best demonstrator of what we're facing as far as getting the infrastructure where it needs to be. Investments, we're making significant investments, but each big investment has a little impact because as we're resurfacing roads, other roads are starting to fail, because it's kind of a constant life cycle. So that's just, I think, probably the most indicative of the challenge that we face. Another thing to consider is that in the GEO bond funds was $1 million for playgrounds, and that covered 3 playgrounds. There are 20 playgrounds actually in our Parks and Recreations facilities citywide. So we're only able to do, 3 out of 20 with $1 million. And that's, though, if any of you have been to see the Herb Watts playground down on Livingston, it's really quite amazing. I recommend checking it out.
And the one at Montford rocks.
Yes, absolutely.
I just saw the
Yeah, they are really amazing playgrounds and absolutely worth it. But they're expensive. We have much better standards for playgrounds, for safety, and we make them out of materials that last a lot longer now. You don't see playgrounds made out of wood and lots of metal and lots of uncoated metal and all those things that you sort of imagine as a kid. Playgrounds are a lot safer and better, but they're more expensive to build. We try as much as we can to leverage the limited resources that we have. We have FTA grants that cover, buses and transit things. They actually cover, when we purchase buses, 80% of the purchase price. So that allows us to purchase significantly more buses than we would otherwise be able to do. We have MPO grants, and that is the Metropolitan something or another. Thank you, Metropolitan Planning Organization. I knew someone would know, and you all did. That's awesome. And then we have partnerships with other organizations locally, and then multiple sources of funds, whether it's grants and partnerships. TDA is an important part of many of these things. We use all of those possible sources of funding to do as much as we can with the limited funding that we have. So future needs and costs. So I thought we would revisit, before we go into specifics, the citizen survey and the priorities that we got out of that. Public safety, as you all recall, was number one. Environmental protection, affordable housing, it goes down the list. But obviously pretty significant interest in public safety and environmental protection and affordable housing. And sidewalks, and and then here's our word cloud. And then funded versus identified. This is something that we worked with departments to see, what do you need to meet all of the goals that we've laid out, all of the strategic priorities that we've got in front of us for improving parks, for improving roads, for improving facilities. What would you need to do all of those things? And requested by the departments was $330 million worth of projects. The total in our current CIP is $60 million. So we have a pretty significant, and this doesn't, when I say everything, the 330, that's not like pie in the sky everything. That's more meeting a desired level of service and a desired level of infrastructure quality. So we have a significant gap there. So the existing CIP does include some ongoing allocations. And as we talked about with road resurfacing, most of these are underfunded only because we don't have the resources to cover all of them. So we try to allocate as much as we can to each area so that everybody gets something. Unfortunately, where that puts us is nobody gets 100% of what they need. So these are some new projects that have come into the CIP. The radio replacements, that's ongoing. Chun's Cove Bridge, we have to rehabilitate. Hazel Mill Road sidewalk. The I-26 connector has been on our radar, but it is coming up now. And then NC 191 sidewalk. And some of these just come out of things like Motorola no longer supporting our radios. So it's, holy cow, we have to replace them now. The Chun's Cove Bridge, we got a notice from the state. You have to rehab this. Those things happen, and then we have to add them to the CIP, and they eat the little bit of capacity that we do have. And then department requests. We have planned projects with additional needs, additional maintenance needs, and unfunded projects. So planned projects with additional needs, we have current budget of 7.5 and projected total need of 15.7. This is related to a number of things: construction cost increase, achieving goals, service delivery. And I think it's important to note that it isn't just Asheville that is looking at this sort of dilemma of we make an estimate and then our costs come in so much higher. NCDOT has had to make significant adjustments to their estimates. And we find that because there is so much work out there right now, it's hard to get contractors to want to bid on our projects. And when they do, they bid much higher because they've got enough work. So we're working on trying to time our bids so that they fall at a time when construction work is falling off. So that's one of the things we try to do as much as we can to minimize those impacts.
So Barbara, on this one, these are actually existing projects that are in the pipeline that are going. So
Yes.
This is not like the 330 million we talked about.
No,
earlier.
these are actually-
This is almost like cost increases on
Existing
projects.
projects.
Got it.
Yeah, existing projects. All right, and then additional
So it's doubled, right?
Yes, and
We
that's.
do build
where-
in some contingency.
Contingency.
We do,
but
we do.
not double.
We usually build in anywhere, depending on the type of project. The different directors build in between like 15, 30%. It depends on what kind of work, but we're finding that even our most conservative estimates, which are ones that when I get them and I say I want to add 30% to that, are still not even coming in the ballpark. And that's a little scary because when you have your finance person who's going to be the most conservative person in the room saying, let's add $1 million to that, and then you're still $3 million short, it's a bit of a crazy environment. Oh, I'm sorry. It's a bit of a crazy environment. So, it's a hard one to do. And then additional maintenance, we have allocations for, annual allocations. We have an annual allocation for roof repair of $150,000. The Shiloh Center roof alone costs $453,000. So our allocation, as you can see, really doesn't cover what we need. And what we end up doing is saving it for several years and then doing one project. The projected annual allocation to maintain a 20-year replacement cycle would be between $800,000 and $1 million per year. And if we wanted to make our roofs solar ready, it would cost another $220,000 to $275,000 per year. And so here is kind of a schedule, not kind of, it is a schedule that we put together of what ideally we would do in order to get to where we need to be. Because where we probably need to be is what you see on fiscal 24, with $1 million in roofs and 2.5 in facilities and all of those. But right now we're nowhere near there. And if we were able to increase the maintenance, our recommendation would be to do it over 5 years like this in order to get to the place where we had that annual allocation that was meeting the needs of the community.
So Barbara, on this one, is this to maintain existing, what we have here? So when we see, so for example, sidewalks, the $500,000, that is just to exist, that is just to maintain the existing network of sidewalks. If we want more, that's not in here, right?
Right. If we want more, that's a different project, and then that increases this.
Right.
Yeah. So, and that's something that's kind of a constant struggle as well, because we want to put sidewalks where they're needed, and then sidewalk maintenance, of course, goes up with that because we've added a new asset. So as much as we want to do great things, and there are areas in the city where we know we need sidewalks, but even our current maintenance of sidewalks is falling far short of what we need. And then we have unfunded projects that we know are extremely
Barbara,
important.
to go back to
certainly.
that last slide, the year-over-year increase is because of the additional amount of assets that the city is trying to maintain, or explain to me what?
This is actually just a model for if we wanted to get to where we think we need to be.
To step up.
Yeah, step it up. Yeah, it doesn't include adding anything. It really is just a step up to where we think we would need to be.
So is the 7.4 million, does it level off there and then just go up with interest, or,
It would go up with, obviously with,
New
interest
assets.
and costs of labor and materials. Where it would increase the most is when we add assets.
Okay. But
Yeah.
this is to get what you would recommend to get us sort of a better
Yes.
working condition.
Yeah, to where we really were maintaining what we already have.
Right.
Yeah, and then from there, if we add something, we would adjust this. You know, kind of like we add something and we have to adjust operations to cover maintenance of, you know, like a new park.
So this is additional monies to what we're spending currently.
Right, right. Okay, and unfunded projects that obviously are high priority. We know that we need to replace the facility, the maintenance facility. That's likely a $50 million project. I know that seems like an enormous price tag, and it is, but the reality of building a new facility is that it really does cost that much money. And then service expansion, when we look at our transit master plan, service expansion is at least 12 million. So we're looking at, you know, operational costs of 12 million and facility replacement of 50 million.
So Barbara, as far as the facility replacement, at this point, we're not putting any funds towards that at all, or?
Yeah, we have no funds towards that.
So what is the plan to do that?
To replace the maintenance facility?
Yeah, I mean, when do we plan on beginning to fund that?
We have no current plan in place. I think right now, what staff is trying to do is evaluate options. Is it something we want to recommend to council that we do a GO referendum for? What kind of options we have out there? Because right now, we just don't have the funding to get there. I mean, even if we set aside money every year, it would be probably well over a decade before we could save enough to get to a place where we could build it.
And Brian, if I could
You may be
just
about to
quickly,
say
I think this is why we are presenting this information, is we've got some tough decisions that we need to make over the next several years in beginning to prioritize our investments in our capital infrastructure. And this is just kind of introductory food for thought. When we go to our retreat in March, we're going to have another deeper dive. And then as we go through the budget discussion, we will be discussing both the CIP as well as the operating budget. But there are some hard choices for us in the future.
So this is to give us an example of because we don't have the transit center on here either. This is just the maintenance facility.
This is just the maintenance facility.
And a couple things on this. I mean, my understanding is the first step in this is that we need to do a study about the kind of facility that we would need and where it could possibly be located and all of that. And hopefully that's going to be in somebody's budget for next year. And then my understanding, and maybe Ken can confirm or deny this, is that I think the expectation is that a significant chunk of this would be paid for with federal dollars, maybe even up to, I mean, you know,
Ken is nodding.
which might leave us maybe more in the realm of 10 million or less, maybe. I don't know, but anyway, I don't know that we need to be planning for 50 million for this facility because there are federal dollars
seems
available.
like unlikely anyway that we would be able to afford that kind of lift.
Yeah. But just so people don't write it off and say, well, there's no way we can do that. I mean,
So that's a
this
good
facility
point.
is, like, we can't expand we can get to about year 3 of our service expansion if we don't replace that facility, and then we're stuck. There's literally no room to put the buses that we will need to continue.
But your
expanding
point
the
is there's significant grant money available for a project
Yes.
like this. We haven't gotten into how to leverage that.
Correct.
Okay, we're debating what is the picture on the far right. Is that the Biltmore estate? Yes, you're saying yes.
On the far right?
I was like,
That's the conservatory.
Okay, that's because that's not the current maintenance facility.
We wish, but, you know.
Yeah,
That's what the new one's gonna like.
yeah.
I think that's where
No
we're gonna put
wonder
the
it's
new one.
$50 million.
Exactly, we're gonna buy it from the Biltmore estate.
Hopefully it will be a
Being
bit
not to
more,
put that picture in.
hopefully it will be a bit more utilitarian than that, but you know. But yeah.
Jeez, design, my
I think they're
goodness.
gonna give us a land
Good, all right.
Yeah.
But yeah, there are, as you stated, lots of opportunities out there. And I think what staff will do, given your guidance on where you want us to head, is really evaluate where there are grants, where there are partnerships, what we need, getting the studies done to determine how many acres we need, where the opportunities are within our city to place this facility. So there are a lot of questions and a lot of things that we have to come up with before we move forward on these. Okay, and unfunded projects again. The full transit expansion and taking care of everything is 76 million.
The capital portion.
That's kind of all in. Thomas Wolfe, full renovation, that's 60 million. Unfortunately, I don't think FTA is going to kick in on that one. You know, I would love it, but
TDA.
But yeah,
I'm
again,
kidding.
Thomas Wolfe is you're showing a number there that's the full build out. There are different
Absolutely.
levels of build out, and there are other funding sources for that project as
absolutely,
well.
and that's a key thing to point out, that when I'm showing you these numbers, these are the if we did everything for these particular items. And Thomas Wolfe renovation, there are different levels of renovation we could choose to do. If we did sort of I don't think this is the ultimate Superfly version, but this is a pretty nice, getting it ready to do where Wicked could come and play and some of that stuff, which would be awesome.
Can I go back to the transit? You don't need to go to put the slide back, but
Sorry.
is there funding included for the facilities study in the transportation budget for next year?
I don't think so, no.
Ken is saying no. Okay, that's okay.
No.
Just putting it on my list for what we need.
And, right, and we're working through what those priorities ought to be, and we'll
Right.
bring those to you.
All right. So then McCormick Field infrastructure upgrades, those are actual infrastructure things like plumbing, actual holding the building up, a lot of the key things to keep the building operational. And then the expansion things, like if the tourist organization wants to add a cooler clubhouse or something like that, cooler, and it's not really a real professional word, but if they wanted to add a
Superfly.
clubhouse that was Superfly.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's the professional term. That would be something that they would do. But the infrastructure upgrades that we're talking about are more really making sure that the building is structurally sound and usable. And then greenway system expansions to put in all of the greenways that we've identified as linkages that we want to, that's 26 million. So that's a lot of unfunded projects. And I know this is like, holy cow, we're never going to be able to do this, and it's really kind of awful to look at, but I think it's a good place to start and say, okay, here we are, and here's the reality. I'm going to keep hitting that, sorry, because my hands, not even Italian, but I have to do that. I don't know, but I think it's a really good place to begin because it says, okay, here we are. Here's this sort of hole that we're in, and we know where we need to be. What are the steps we need to take to get there?
So Barbara, to summarize, like if there were a slide, I'm trying to sort of piece together this because what I'm trying to get a sense of is, okay, overall, what are we looking at in terms of people's requests? Understanding that they're not all going to get funded, we have to prioritize, but in terms of what is sort of on our plate. If we go back to it, I just want to make sure I have this. We have the $330 million requested by the department, so that's
Right.
their wish list, right? That's what they would like, although it's not like pie in the sky, right? So it's
That's
not.
correct.
This is like legit requests over those years, right? We have the $167 million here. We have the $7.4 million additional that we want to maintain, or are those together?
Together.
Okay, so that's already
The
based in.
330, I believe, is all that, right?
Okay,
And it's inclusive of this as well?
It's inclusive of this.
Yeah, okay.
Okay,
Yeah,
I'm sorry. So if we were to have like sort of an overall number,
The
we're looking at
330.
$330 million. Do we add the 8.2 that's coming in higher from the existing projects?
Is that
Would
it?
we add that to
Would we
that?
add that?
So we'd be 338 point.
It's
It's
included?
It is included as well? Okay.
Included.
Okay, so if we were looking at an overall number here, we'd be looking at around 333 million over the next 4 years, and we currently have about 60.
Right, right. Yeah.
Well, and that's not, we're talking about it here in this work session, but it's not really a new story.
No.
This is not a new story. We're just putting it on slides right now.
Right, we're just laying it all out so people can understand the challenges that you face in making these decisions.
So help me out in terms of because this is sort of, I mean, it may not be a new story for some of you guys, it's a little bit of a new story for me in terms of the overall numbers, right? That's kind of a bigger number, right? How we fund it is also kind of the bigger question here too. But in terms of, again, what I'm trying to get a sense of is maintenance versus expansion, right? And so in terms of that 330, the only thing we're talking about expanding right now is we're talking about expanding transit, we're talking about
And the
these
greenway.
and the greenways, right? And these renovations. So
Well,
in terms
anything in the bond project is a capital
Right,
expansion.
Any of the bond projects.
right, so, and some of those, okay, and some of those as well. So if we're talking about expanding sidewalks or expanding roads over and above what's either in the bond or what's up here, that's
Would be
not included. That would be new. That would be additional to 300.
Some of it's deferred maintenance
Some
and
of
some
it-
of it's new.
Right,
Yeah.
some of that 330 are new things for, service needs that have been identified, and then some are capital maintenance.
Yeah.
So there's a pretty significant list that we're happy to share that has kind of everything prioritized and says what we all.
Right, and the reason I keep harping on this and asking a lot is I kind of, in terms of kind of being clear about what, to Ms. Campbell's point about the priorities here. I mean, regardless of whether or not we think these may be on the high end or low end, like this is going to be a huge lift. I mean, let's be blunt about it here. And the only way we're going to be able to fund these things, I mean, there's three ways of funding it, right? There's grant dollars, right? There's debt, and there's supplementing from the operating fund, which, and we'll see how that looks, in a couple weeks as well, given all the other projects we have on that. So, these are big numbers, and the question is, where do you find the revenue to actually meet them, right?
Exactly.
Well, and I think there's never enough money really to meet absolutely every capital need. There's never going to be, but I think it helps focus budgeting decisions when you know that this is out there and it needs to be addressed, and it's especially important when presented with new spending projects, new projects that require significant city spending or not even significant city spending, to keep that in mind when we're talking about how to fund this year over year.
Right. Okay. All right, so revisiting basically the messages that we want to make sure you take with you is that, Asheville has historically been challenged to fund all these capital needs. But recent investments, very much thanks to council and your commitment to capital investment, we have improved the overall quality of our assets, and we are improving our maintenance as much as it doesn't show a lot, because it's a continuum. But continued investments, we have to continue our momentum in order to meet the needs of the community and really be where we want to be.
And before you get into next steps, I'd just like to also add that we are trying to communicate that the things that we are working on now in terms of getting our arms around the strategic priorities, suggesting what things may be short, medium, and long-term, so that we have a better approach to how we address these needs, because they are significant. But I do think that as we are talking about revenue diversification, all of those things are all linked, and we're trying to make sure that we have the level of alignment that is needed organizationally for us to know these are our priorities, this is where we can look to in terms of the toolbox of financing or pay-go or whatever types of sources of revenue, so that we can hopefully reduce that gap between need and our ability to pay and address those needs. It's not, the numbers seem daunting, but I believe that as we focus and prioritize, that we will be able to chip away at this task. I'll put it that way.
Very well. All right, so next steps. So we've just provided the information to you about, what's out there in the available resources. Staff will continue to review and develop recommended CIP. Council will review the draft preliminary in March and April, and then the budget adoption will be in May or June. So any more questions, comments?
If you don't, I would like to see the list of the projects, the totals of 330.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Just to understand.
Yeah, I mean, it would be.
Because I was getting confused as to what was maintenance and what was.
Absolutely. And
My impression is that, for example, the transit maintenance facility was in there to the tune of $50 million as part of that 330. And 60 million was the Thomas Wolfe. I mean, projects that we know we may not be spending that kind of money on, projects we know we're going to have significant grant funding on. So it'd be helpful for us to be able to see that to kind of balance out that picture.
And we can identify also where we anticipate grants impacting those numbers.
Yeah, that'd be good to note some. I mean, we know Greenway projects, usually we can get TPDF funding for, different kinds of.
I'll just, you didn't put this up here, but, at HCD committee, we've been seeing a lot of presentations about these high impact sites, and we know that there's the Cedar Hill property and there's Oak Hill, which are, other potentially significant affordable housing developments. And it's pretty clear to me that the money that we've set aside for in the bond for affordable housing is going to be gone pretty quickly with those sites. And so I'll just want to take this opportunity to make sure we all understand that even though affordable housing didn't show up in here, we're going to have some significant opportunities and really needs to make additional, bond level investments in affordable housing to achieve the vision that we have for all of these properties, just even the 5 that we've identified right now, the 3 high impact sites, Cedar Hill and Oak Hill. So that's just another piece of it. Are any of those included in the 330 million, or is that totally separate?
They're all looking at you.
I don't think
Not
they
yet.
are.
Not, okay, so let's just tack on some more.
Yeah. I'm sure we could tack on more all day,
Yeah.
but yeah. All right, thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Barb, one other thing, I'm sorry, just one other thing on here. I promised the last thing. One of the suggestion, or thing would be helpful for us as we go through it, and I know this is going to be part of the budget, is to help us understand how we figure out the funding on some of these things as well. And again, some of this, as Gwen asked for, the 330 is very helpful, where we might expect grants. But also in terms of kind of looking at this and saying, look, what are potential other options other places do? I mean, it shocks me in terms of just looking at like the lack of debt. If you go back to like the fiscal year 9 and 10, and granted that was like the Great Recession too, so a lot of folks weren't doing much of anything at that point. But historically, I can understand the sort of conservative nature of it here, but we're paying for that now. It's penny wise, pound foolish. I mean, all that kind of stuff, all that stuff that wasn't done, all the investments that weren't made, like we're dealing with that right now. So, and again, a lot of that is just to maintain the baseline. So for those of you who are watching, as we go through this, I think we need to understand that. I'm not trying to blame other councils before us, but that is the issue we are dealing with right now, is how to basically fund what wasn't funded in years past.
We can identify in the list not only potential grants or partnerships, we can also identify what kind of debt they would be eligible for, that kind of,
Like whether it's,
Yeah, because it could be special obligation if it's in one of our innovation districts.
Right.
Lobs
and sobs.
Yep, lobs and sobs and goes. All right, thank you so much.
There you go. Your favorite.
My favorite.
Okay, unless there's anything further, we're going to adjourn, and we'll come back at 5 to do our city council meeting.
And I just wanted to thank the staff for being here as well. Appreciate it.
Pretty good to help it.